Alright, so welcome back. Today we're making another type of enemy where this is going to act kind of just like a turret. So if I get within range of it, it's going to fire stuff at me, just like that. And yeah, let's dive right in. Hey everybody, welcome back. So what we're going to start with today is we're going to make another version of our little enemy here. So this will be the, I don't know, 4th, 5th type of enemy that we'll have. And this is going to be a little turret enemy that just stays completely stationary, but when the player gets within a certain range, it's going to fire a projectile towards where the player was at that point in time. Then it's going to wait a small amount of time and fire another one. So it's not just firing projectiles like mad. So let's dive right in. So just like last time we made a new enemy, I'm going to grab one of these logs and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to move it into this scene this time. I've been using that other scene so much. I'm going to move it over here. And then I want to make it a different prefab. So in 2018.3, you right click and you unpack prefab completely. If you're using an earlier version of Unity, you want to go to game object and then break prefab instance. So this is going to be a completely different log. I'm going to call this a turret log. And this turret log is going to have, like I said, a range, and it's also going to have a projectile. So I'm going to remove the regular log script from it because it's going to have a different one. And first thing, I guess, is I'm going to work on the projectile. So I'm going to go into my art folder here. We have an objects folder, and I'm going to open that up in my sprite editor. And this, yep, there it is, has these little rock bits right here. So I'm going to grab one of these. I'm not going to worry about making this 16 by 16 this time. I'm going to call it rock 1. And then I might come back for those later for like a particle system. I don't know. If you wanted to, if you were super ambitious, you could make a particle system so that when the rock hits something, it breaks into these teeny tiny rocks, these bitty bitty 4x4 rocks, but you'd be more ambitious than I am. Okay, so now that I have the rock broken off into its own thing, I'm going to grab it and pull it into the world, and on its sprite renderer, I'm going to move it up to the player layer, and I'll put it above the player, so I'll put it at 1 in the layer. This is going to need to have a collider on it, so I'm just going to add a box collider. Actually, I think a circle collider is more efficient. There we go. So I'm going to make this a trigger, and I'm also going to add a rigid body 2D to this. In general, Unity doesn't like things moving unless they have either a character controller or a rigid body controller. So once I add the rigid body, I have to make sure that I'm going to set the gravity scale on this to 0. And I want this to be kinematic. I don't want it to be dynamic. I mean, unless it could be fun. Like you could make a game where like the player bounces these around the scene or something. Like that boss fight with Aghanim in the original Legend or in A Link to the Past. That could be fun. Oh well, okay. I'm going to leave it kinematic. I'm also going to change my collision detection to continuous. I want it to never sleep, and I want it to extrapolate. Constraints, I'll freeze the rotation, even though I think it would look cool if it was spinning. I'm just going to leave it not spin. Alright, cool. Now, before I fire this off, I'm going to make a new script for this little duder here. So I'm going to go to my scripts, I'm going to go into my enemy stuff, right click, I'm going to create a C# script for rock projectile, and I'm going to create another script that's going to be just a base projectile script, and I'll put that in objects. So in here I will right click, because I'm going to have more than one projectile. There's no point in copying the scripting I'm going to have to do for it. So this is going to be a C# script, it's going to be projectile, and then I'll open both of those. So I'll open projectile and I'll open rock projectile. So Visual Studio is opening. I'll meet you back here in just a minute. Okay, so here we are in Visual Studio, and my rock projectile is going to inherit from projectile and my projectile script. So what does every projectile need? Well, it probably needs to have an on-trigger enter 2D, but it's going to be different for the player and for the enemy. But every projectile should probably have an amount of damage, right? And probably an amount of knockback. Yeah, it'd be fun to have knockback. So let's make a public float. No, let's make it an integer. We'll call this damage amount. And then let's save that. And then, okay, hold on one second. Okay, sorry for that weird cut. I had forgotten what I put in the knockback script. I forgot that I already had thrust, knock time, and damage. So damage is already in knockback. So if I add knockback to the rock projectile, I don't need to have that built into the base projectile script. What I do need to have built into the base projectile script is a speed for its movement and a direction I want it to move, or in which I want it to move. So I'm going to add a public float, and I'll call this move speed. And then I'll also do a direction I want it to travel in. So a public vector2 direction to move. Right, and so the direction to move can be calculated based on where, so if it's a turret enemy, it'll, okay, let me explain this. So let's say our player, let's just move our player really quickly, is right, mirror, so that I have them both on the screen. So let's say our player is right here. I want my turret enemy to fire towards where the player is when it fires. So when it creates the rock, it's going to also tell the rock what direction to go. And you could make like a homing rock and tell a target to move towards. That could be kind of fun, but for now we're just going to, like an Octorock. So it's going to create a projectile, and it's going to tell it needs to move towards the player, or not move towards the player, but move in a vector that is this position minus that position times its speed, and that'll be its velocity. And since it has a rigid body on it that is kinematic, it won't interact with physics. I also want my projectile to disappear after a certain amount of time, because I don't want this projectile going, forever. I want it to have almost like a range or a lifetime to it. So that's what I'm going to do. All right. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to pop back into Visual Studio, and I'll come up with a public float lifetime. And I'm going to create a private version of this because I'm going to have a counter that counts down in the background. So private float lifetime seconds. Now in my start method, I'm going to set lifetime seconds equal to lifetime. And then in my update method, I'm going to tick down lifetime seconds. Minus equals time dot delta time. And then I'm going to check to see if it's less than or equal to 0. So if lifetime seconds is less than or equal to, you don't want to use equal to with floats because it could pass 0. It could be like 0.001 and then negative 0.02 or something like that. If lifetime seconds is less than or equal to 0, then I want to destroy this .game object. Destroy this .game object. All right. So I'm also going to create a little method here for giving it velocity. So this is going to be a public void give, or maybe like launch. Maybe launch is better. This is going to take an argument, vector2, and we'll call this, I don't know, initial, initial place to go, thing to go, chase, initial I'll just call it initial velocity. So I'm going to do, we need to have an access to the rigid body. So everything that's a projectile needs a rigid body. Private, I don't know if you can tell, but I didn't make notes for this one. Rigid body 2D, my rigid body, and then in my start method here, my rigid body is equal to get component rigid body 2D, and then we'll add that velocity to the rigid body. So my dot velocity is equal to initial velocity times move speed. Alright, cool. Now if it intersects with something, so public void on trigger enter 2D, and I'm going to call that other. Since the knockback's already giving the damage, I don't need to give damage. Instead, I'll just destroy this .gameObject. Alright, I have a feeling that this is going too easy here. This is too good. Alright, so my rock projectile, I haven't added anything to it, but I have a feeling I might want to in the future. Like if I want to have a particle system for this one, but not for every other projectile, it's good to have this be inherited from a main projectile, especially since I know that I want my player to have at least one projectile weapon. It's good to have these separated so that I can change them at some point in the future. Now I need to add my headers here. So this is going to be movement stuff. Man, I can't imagine how much people would hate my naming of variables. This is going to be lifetime. Alright, so I'm going to save that and pop back into Unity here. Let that compile for a second. I'm going to go back over to my nice little rock. Right now it's called rock 1. I'm going to call it rock projectile. As soon as everything's done thinking here. There we go. And this is going to get a knockback component. And it's also going to get, so let me close some of these. It's also going to get a rock projectile component. So my move speed for this, I'm going to set it relatively low, let's say 2. And its lifetime is, let's say 2, just to play around. And for my knockback, I'm going to give it a thrust of 1, knock time of 0.3, and a damage of, I don't know, let's say 1. No, we'll do 2. Alright, cool. So we got our rock projectile set up. Now I'm going to go into my prefabs here, and man, I need to organize this a bit more. Let's create a new folder and call this enemy stuff. And let's see, this is going to get, it's going to get the logs. It's going to get the, here, did I make, it's going to get an area log. That needs to be a projectile from last time. Prefabs. Okay, cool. And it's also going to get the rock projectile. Enemy stuff. Alright, cool. Now I can delete the rock projectile from here. Now I'm going to make another new script, and I'm going to call this turret enemy. That's going to also inherit from log. So create C# script turret enemy. And let's open this up in Visual Studio. This is going to inherit from log. So log. And if I look at my log script here, the only thing I really want to change is this check distance. So get rid of all this. So public override void check distance. And I don't want to do the base check distance, but I do want to use most of the code that's in there. So I'm going to copy this just like I did with my limited enemy. So copy, and I'm going to paste it in here. All right, so if our distance to our target is less than our chase radius, for our purposes, chase radius is going to be like a detect radius. And a vector 3, oh, this should have an public game object. Actually, let's do game object. I was debating whether or not we should instantiate it as a game object or a rock projectile, and I think it's better to do game object and then just use get component to get to the rock projectile script. So public game object projectile. There we go. So if our distance to the target is less than our chase radius, which for our purpose is going to be our attack radius, and it's greater than our attack radius, which our purpose is going to be like, I don't know, when our player gets close enough, or we could even set this to 0. If our current state is idle, okay, then we're not going to move towards the player. But I am going to change the state to walk. I'm just not going to move towards the player. And if the target position is greater, then I'm going to go back to sleep. Okay, cool. Now what I want to do is I want to create a temporary vector, which is the difference between the player and the rock. So vector 2, I think I have to do this as a 3 since I'm using transforms. We'll call this vector 3 temp vector is equal to transform.position minus target.transform.position. So it's the distance between us. Then I want to instantiate projectile at our transform dot position and quaternion dot identity. I can see 2 possible issues with this, but I want to explain what those issues are before I fix them. Alright, so instantiate, cool. Now in the log, is there already an update method? There's a fixed update method, but there's no update method. Cool. So I'm going to create a delay between each of the projectiles because otherwise it's just going to create like a stream of them. So I want to instantiate it, and then I want to instantiate it as a game object. So we'll call this game object current is equal to instantiate all that stuff. Now I want to do current.getComponent rock projectile dot, actually it shouldn't be rock projectile, it should just be projectile. That way I can have it use different things. Rock projectile dot launch, and I want to pass in temp vector as the launch vector. Alright, cool. So I can see 2 things wrong with this, but I want to explain what those 2 things are before I fix them. Alright. Oh no, I'm gonna get a null reference in just a second if I don't fix something. Okay. Come on, Unity. Let me unplay you. Thank you. So the first issue, if I look at my turret log, I need to give it its prefab, which is the rock projectile. Oh, and the turret log didn't get the, cool, turret enemy script. So this needs to know all kinds of stuff. So let's give it its rock projectile. Animator gets set home position I'm not using. Attack radius I'm going to set high to 6. Chase radius is, oh actually, attack radius is 0. It's chase radius. I want to be 6. The target is the player. Rigid body gets set. Death effect. Is it prefabs? Move speed is 0. Base attack I'll set as 0. Enemy name Paul. And then for the health, I'm just going to give it that same 2-hit health I've been giving everything else. So enemy stuff, 2-hit enemy health. Current state is idle. Alright, so let's... Oh, no, there's one more thing I need to fix. So since I was messing around with the dungeon in the last video, and I haven't messed around with this yet, my camera settings still thinks it should be at the... Well, it's not my camera, it's my player. My player thinks he should reset to where he is in the dungeon, so I need to come up with a way to fix, a better fix for this. So let's do 15, -8. So I'm going to go to my player stuff, player position, default value, 15, -8. Alright. So now, let's give this a try. If I hit play, this is going to be a long video. I apologize. Because there's going to be some issues we got to fix. Alright. Cool, they didn't follow me. Haha! So I wonder if any of you can figure out what that issue was. So, first there's a null reference exception. Okay. Object not set to an instance of an object. Projectile.launch, vector 2, projectile line 35. So, projectile line 35. Not set to an instance. Huh. Okay, well let's just make this public then, so it knows its own rigid body. But the other issue that happened there, I'm wondering if anybody can figure out. So as soon as I got in range of the enemy, you don't see a single rock, and then the enemy explodes. That is one of the two issues I knew would happen. The other one is going to happen in just a second here. So let me go to my enemy stuff, my rock projectile, open prefab, and I want this to know what its rigid body is. There we go. Go back to my scene. Let's hit play. So hopefully I don't get that that error message, that null reference exception. But let's see. Okay, cool. No null reference exception, but the enemy destroys itself right away. So, again, I wonder if you guys can figure out what the problem is. So if we look at the knockback script, I added the knockback to the projectile, and the knockback checks to see on trigger enter collider 2D other, checks to see what it is. If it's a breakable object, it breaks it. If it's an enemy, it gives it damage. So that rock, which is being created right at the enemy, is giving the enemy damage. There's a way to fix this though. So I'm going to go to my rock projectile, open my prefab, and I'm going to use the layer here. I'm going to put it on a different layer. So I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to call this enemy projectile. Alright, and then go back to the rock projectile and put it on the enemy projectile layer. Now the reason I did that is because I can make Unity ignore physics between certain objects. So if I go to Edit, Project Settings, and then in Project Settings I want to go to Physics 2D, and I want to have my enemy projectile, first of all, not interfere with enemy projectiles, and I also want it not to interfere with the enemy. So I'm just going to uncheck those boxes right there. Alright, so now that fixes one issue, but there's going to be another one here. So let's find out what that other issue is. Okay, so there's 3 issues. I got 2 of them. Alright, look at all these projectiles. That's crazy. Alright, let's get rid of that. So I needed to make it negative when I pass the value in. So I'm going to go to my turret enemy script, and I'm going to say temp vector is equal to that. So instead of launching temp vector, let's see. Oh, I should do target minus, okay, there we go. So it should be target.transform.position minus transform.position. So it's the target's position minus our position. Cool, there we go. And then instantiating the projectile. So there's way too many of them. So we're going to create a little timer here, just like we did for the projectile itself. So I'm going to create a public float, and I'm going to call this fire delay, and a private float called fire delay seconds. Then, since I'm not using an update loop in the base class, I'm going to use an update loop here, and I'm going to do void update. I want to take the fire delay seconds minus equals time dot delta time, and then I want to check to see if fire delay seconds is less than 0. So if fire delay seconds is less than or equal to 0, I want to reset it back to whatever it was. So I'm going to make another public bool can fire equals true. So I'm going to set can fire equals true, and then fire delay seconds equals fire delay. All right, and then after I fire something, I'm going to make can fire false. Can fire false. All right, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to pop back into Unity here, and let's hit play. And let's see if this works now. Alright, so here I go towards my turret enemy. Oh, good lord. Oh, I didn't set my fire delay. Okay. I turned into a bullet hell game there for a second. So my fire delay is going to be, say, 0.3 seconds. Alright. Let's try this again. That's funny. Oh, duh. I need to add another check here. So I only want to fire. So I only want to do all of this if can fire is true. So if can fire. What did I just do? Okay. So if can fire, then mirror. And mirror. There we go. So I'm going to save this back into Unity. Seems like I've had way more rough videos lately than polished ones, so if you prefer the polished videos, I'm sorry. This one I didn't make notes for. Just going from the cuff. Alright, so in here, I'm going to go up. Alright, so probably, there we go. Alright, probably too quick. So let's make this 0.7. Let's try this again. Alright, and if you notice our little guy wakes up and it looks like he's walking in place, that's just because that's the animation we have for this little duder. Alright, so I'm going to go in here. It's kind of fun. It makes for kind of a cool mechanic. Alright, cool. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the description down below. I'm going to try to update my Git sometime this weekend, so you can see what I'm currently at for my project. You can follow me on Twitter. You can join my Discord if you want to find out exactly when I post new videos. The Discord's really awesome. It's full of super knowledgeable people. Honestly, there's probably people on there who know more than I do, which is really awesome. Yeah, and I hope everybody out there has themselves a wonderful day. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving a like, subscribing to the channel, or telling a friend who might be interested. Also, please consider following me on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can earn access to tangible rewards, like early access to videos, backer-only videos and series, polls for future topics, streams, and even individual tutoring sessions. You can find a link to that in the description. And as always, have yourselves a wonderful day.